and believe in hard work and are not afraid of it. And the last thing that they could be accused of is bringing down the decline of the country. They're the ones that are basically the backbone of the country.
Well, it's interesting in the administration, in the Obama administration, one of the questions to the Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner was that will we be downgraded? And he said absolutely not. That'll never happen. Well, the absurdity is we did pass this emergency spending bill that really was an $8 trillion increase in spending, and the agencies downgraded the United States,
which they had warned they would do ahead of time.
And they warned unless we quit spending.
Right.
And that was another thing in the debate, that Michelle Bachmann was attacked because she was supposed to be one of the causes of the trouble, but she defended herself pretty well. She said,
this is where I like the second part. The root of the righteous cannot be moved. And one of the things that she has stood firm on was, I will not pass any bill. I will not vote yes to any spending. We have to cut. We have to do things that are good for our country. And she's like one of the few people.
Well, I call it the 22 heroes in Congress, because only 22 ultimately stood for no increase in spending, which is where the real problem is in our Congress. They're on a spending spree, and when I say spending, they're taking money out of my pocket, and it's not just mine anymore. They have found a way that by borrowing and by printing money, they can take money out of my grandchildren's pocket.
Probably great-great-grandchildren.
This is so evil, it's beyond evil. But let's go on with some verses here. Machiavellia is the prince. We'll be talking about Machiavellia more as we do wisdom, because our modern political system is very much based on Machiavellia. The prince lies to the people. Behavior modification, semantic mysticism, these are all concepts that the modern political scientist has learned to use to deceive the people.
Okay, the next verse is 4, and it says, an excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who causes shame is like rottenness in his bones.
Well, as a woman, how do you see that verse?
How do I see that?
As a wife that is that person, I have to say I have been blessed amazingly that I have a wife that is not a rot to my bones. She does not wear me out. She uplifts me.
I was glad you were not saying I was that part of it.
You're not. You're the person that isn't the woman that wears you out. But you explain that verse from a woman's view.
Well, I think one of it is one point is that even though I may not agree with everything that you say all the time, I still submit to your authority that God has given you. And you know, some people that have heard us argue go, oh my gosh, what are you so mad at each other about? And we say, we're not. We're just discussing. And it's something that modern Americans don't know how to do. They think if you argue heatedly and...
So when we discuss intellectually?
Right.
But are we just intellectuals?
No, we're emotional.
Oh, wait a minute. We are also emotional, which means we raise our voice, we lower our voice, we're passionate.
Right.
And unless you're really passionate about an idea, you probably don't really believe in it.
Sometimes we're physical, not by beating each other up.
Well, you beat me up, but I have never beaten you up.
Oh, yeah. But by, a hand motion. Sometimes we'll get up and walk around. Sometimes we'll be so... I don't know, emotionally involved, we may have to walk out the door and come back in and rediscuss again.
That's true. There's times to not continue the discussion. And any husband and wife knows that.
And that's where it's wisdom is to know what time it is.
Wisdom is to know what time it is. That's right. Proverbs. No, that's Ecclesiastics. There's a time for peace and there's a time for war. There's a time for argument. There's a time for loving. And that's where I think Michelle Bachmann, because her jurisdictional sovereignty concept, without jurisdictional sovereignty, you can't get this.
No, you can't
You just see this big centralized Babylonian government that comes down upon us and rules over us, instead of the biblical view, which the people are giving sovereignty. They delegate some of it to the government, but they keep most of it to themselves. They keep the jurisdiction to themselves. Our society has no concept
It's just
of
like
jurisdictional
when
sovereignty.
we have mostly worked for ourselves, done business ourselves, and we discuss everything. But there have been a couple times in our lives when we've worked for other people, and we know that we have to do what those other people say. They have the authority to do that, but we will still discuss with each other. Should I take this job? Should I go this direction? So there's still communication, even though there's a distinction in authority.
It's interesting. I have a lot of pastor friends that I know, and I find we've been missionaries for 40 years, I guess now, and close to that at least, and they're lonely, and they don't have anybody to talk to. I just find that kind of crazy. The reason is because I do have someone to talk to as long as you stay alive, and that's my wife, because we talk, and we don't talk just about the kids, just about the economics. We talk about ideas, and sometimes Lee doesn't want to talk about those things, and as a husband I have to make her. Sometimes I don't want to do things, and she actually encourages me and makes me. And she does it differently than I do, but we always have the other person's best interest at heart.
That's where the Bible says that 2 strands are better than 1, 3 strands. And I do find it strange, too, that pastors and wives are not the best of friends and can't discuss anything with each other, because why would you not? If you can't trust the person you're married to, there's really nobody else to trust.
Well, that's where if your wife doesn't have your back, nobody does.
Yeah.
And
and
so many times
your husband has your back.
I find that men tend to look for some man to have their back, and there's no one that has my interest as much as my wife does, because we're one flesh. The fruit of our labor is one ownership, and our relationship to the world is one. So, but if we're not one, if we're not one flesh, if we're not one ownership, and we're not one in relationship to the world,
easily divided.
And that's where I find, although Newt Gingrich did an awesome job last night at fighting back as presidential candidate,
his wife caused shame and rottenness in his bones because she had to go on a vacation.
Well, I think
took
that's
him away.
What's interesting is that's his how many wives? It's a number.
It's his third, I
believe. The Bible
believe.
says to be a leader, especially in the church, it doesn't require this. Absolutely in the civil government, the principle is wise, because the basic covenant of life is the covenant you make with your husband or your wife. I found interesting just last week, Sean Hannity was doing an interview with the ex-governor of South Carolina. I'm just blanking out on
Sanford.
What's his first name?
I don't know.
Sanford.
I just know him as Sanford.
I can't think of his first name right now, but Sanford.
Governor Sanford.
Governor Sanford. Yeah. He actually, when well, to put it in a context, he was the governor of South Carolina. He's very conservative. He's a Baptist. He's a Christian. He believes in the Bible. Those are all things he does. He believes in marriage. Those are all his beliefs. There's no question of that. But when he married his wife, he didn't want, according to her book, he didn't want to have in his vows the principle of faithfulness. Now, faithfulness is one of the fruits of the Spirit. It's very hard to be faithful to someone because there's always temptations to not be faithful. There's economic temptations to not be faithful in business. There's temptations in marriage to not be faithful in marriage. There's so many ways to be tempted, but he didn't want that, and that's what tripped him up. his breaking of the covenant that he made with his wife to be one with her until death us do part. Marriage is not a temporary thing in our culture because there is more involved, and I think this is God established marriage not for the married, not for the husband and wife. And this is the sad thing I think we've done with our culture. Well, it's not making me feel good anymore to be married.
I'm not happy.
I'm not happy. Well, deal with it and put on your, what is it, your...
Put on your big girl panties
put on
deal
your
with it.
big girl panties and deal with it. Pantyhose, that's what it is.
No, just panties.
Panties,
It's
okay.
just panties.
Anyways, put on your adult pants and deal with it. And in other words, we're not just emotional beings. Our modern culture, Hollywood, has taught us that marriage is based on passion, on sex, on love. Love meaning eros. But here we have a man who is Governor Sanford.
And he's not a dumb man.
He's a very smart man.
Intelligent.
And he really gets economics, and he really understands why we can't borrow, and he's got a lot of skills.
And we can say the same thing for Newt Gingrich.
And
He's
that's
not a
the
stupid
problem
man.
with
He's
Newt
intelligent.
Gingrich. He was a really smart man, but he ended up being seduced by the harlot, which his new wife used to be his secretary.
Yeah.
And he was married to another woman, and Bill Clinton knew that they were pulling this, and Bill Clinton was able to neutralize Newt Gingrich. In other words, his covenant, not covenant keeping, hurt him.
Are we talking about Newt
Newt
now?
Gingrich.
Yeah.
But it's also with Sanford, his not covenant keeping. But see, to be president, you have to make a covenant with the American people.
Right.
That you will defend and protect the Constitution. And if you won't keep the covenant, the basic covenant of your marriage, I believe there's a sound argument that you should not qualify to be president. Now, I know that Ronald Reagan was divorced. And I also know that he was divorced as a young man, and he stayed married for a very long time. But you know, it's interesting, before that, I'm not sure there were any presidents that were ever divorced. And I really believe that Ronald Reagan may have opened the door. This was an area of Ronald Reagan's weakness. Although Ronald Reagan also was a Democrat at one time, and he left and repented and left that. And I think he did become a Christian after a lot of these things happened to him.
Yeah.
But we have to take very seriously, and this is the problem with Newt Gingrich.
Yeah, it's
Newt
one reason
Gingrich
I do not trust him.
has been in office. He has in office, he failed to keep his covenants with the people because they had things on him. And it was part of this relationship. And now we've seen, even as he's been in his area of even running for president, his people that worked with him saw that he has a woman problem.
Yeah.
And that's one reason he doesn't qualify to be president. I think he's a really smart guy, and I like him on my team. And maybe Secretary of State would be a good place for him, but president is not a place he should be. Oh, I think it's very interesting, though, that in this discussion that we're talking about how America is different than Europeans, Martin Bashir, who's not exactly a friend of Christianity, really did an editorial this week, and maybe we'll try to bring it in sometime to our show, talking about how America is different than Europe, because we're not secular like Europe. We kind of have a theistic view.
Yeah, we sure do.
But as a theistic view comes to the Declaration of Independence, because of the Creator, all men have certain inalienable rights. We believe our rights come from the Creator, not from the state. Martin Bashir clearly gets that, and I think it creates lots and lots of very interesting discussions we can have. We need to probably read some more verses.
Well, you know, do we want to keep going here?
We can go for a little while. We still have more to do.
Okay. This is our problem with talking about Proverbs. Nobody ever believes. They think you read through Proverbs, you're done with your Proverbs reading, because we always encourage people to read Proverbs.
That's actually why we started doing this. Lee and I, as we travel for years and years, we would read Proverbs because we didn't have the opportunity to go to churches. We were moving all the time. Usually on Sundays is when we were moving. And every 3 weeks we were moving, and just to visit.
Sometimes every week.
We got tired of visiting. So we began to really have our own little church